Hello and welcome to First Contact, the world's first podcast where we openly discuss all things relating to humanity's preparation for open contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. I'm your host, Isha Patel. If you are loving this content, please be sure to join us in the First Contact Facebook community and let us know what you think. Let's dive into another exciting episode of First Contact. Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's interview. Our special guest today is Avi Loeb, who I am very, very excited to meet with. I've been following Avi's work for quite a number of years. I'm currently reading his book. He has a new book coming out, which I'm excited to get some inside scoops in. For those of you that don't know Avi Loeb yet, Avi is a theoretical physicist and professor of science at Harvard University and the founding director of Harvard's Black Hole Initiative. And in 2021, Loeb also initiated and is heading the Galileo Project, which is a systematic scientific search for evidence of extraterrestrial technological artifacts. Now, Loeb is also the best-selling author of Extraterrestrial, the first sign of intelligent life beyond Earth, and a number of other publications and books. And today I'm really excited to have Avi here. Personally, I just want to pick your brains a little bit, Avi. I think you're doing some incredible research in this space. I am a UFO enthusiast, have been for 7+ years, probably my whole life. Welcome to the show, and I'm just really excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I should say that I was never a UFO fan, and was not the reason I got into this subject. It's just that I want to understand the reality that we live in. We often think that we are the smartest kid on the cosmic block. It may not be the case. In fact, I don't think Albert Einstein was the smartest scientist who ever lived since the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago, because just in the Milky Way galaxy, there are tens of billions of stars like the sun, and most of them formed 10 billion years ago, much earlier than the sun. The sun formed 4.6 billion years ago. So they had their clock started ticking well before ours. And if you roll the dice of intelligence billions of times, it's very likely that, something like us happened before us. And therefore, we should just be agnostic and look for evidence. And if we see unusual things, we should explore them further. That's what motivates me. And we can speak more about the details of how I came to work on this subject from a point of view of an astronomer.
I definitely do want to get into that. The first thing I just want to clear up, and I think the answer is obvious. So you do believe that extraterrestrials exist, and you can say that with some level of certainty.
Yeah, this is, I think, to think otherwise is arrogant, because first of all, the big numbers that I mentioned, but also, I don't think that we are that intelligent ourselves. If you watch the daily news, you see that we waste a lot of energy and effort in fighting each other. That's not a sign of intelligence. In fact, I calculated that if you were to use all the military budget allocated worldwide to space exploration, we could, in principle, send about 1 million probes to 20 stars every year.
Wow.
If instead of fighting each other, we would seek peace and just explore space. And that means that within 1 billion years, we'll basically be able to plant 1 million probes around every star in the habitable zone. And just one civilization like ours can do that if they put their mind into it, if they are peaceful and scientific in the way they view reality. That means that even if there was one civilization like ours more than 1 billion years ago, we could have 1 million probes within the region that the Earth carves around the sun, okay, right now. And it's not a philosophical question of whether we live in such a reality. It's not a science fiction idea. It's a question that we can address scientifically by looking out, looking up and checking, do we have any objects that were manufactured by alien technologies in our vicinity? We sent 5 probes to interstellar space. They are Voyager 1, Voyager 2, Pioneer 10, Pioneer 11, and New Horizons. That's over the past 50 years. So just imagine if instead of having a science and technology epoch of just 1 century, we had it for 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years, or maybe 1,000,000,000 years, how many more probes will we launch into space? And therefore, whether others did it can be found by looking around us. And these may be small spacecraft. They don't need to be huge. And one thing to keep in mind is just over the past decade, we had the capacity to detect objects as big as a football field within the orbit of the Earth around the sun from the reflection of sunlight. And guess what?
I do actually want to get into this because this is probably one of the main things that I want to talk about. And before we get into that one though, so I'm tuning in from Australia, right? And I saw you do an interview recently on Channel 7 Sunrise about an artifact that was found in the northeast coast of Australia. Can we talk a little bit about that before we jump into this giant football-sized floating object that you've discovered?
Yeah, so actually, this was a meteor. Usually a meteor is a rock that collides with Earth. So the Earth is like a fishing net. As it moves around the sun, it collides with objects along its path. And the US government is monitoring the atmosphere for national security purposes. They're looking for any ballistic missiles, anything that are sent in the direction of the US. And every now and then they see a meteor, because when it goes through the atmosphere very fast, it eventually explodes from the friction with the air, and you get a fireball. And they reported back in 2014 about a meteor, and together with my student, we realized that the report was with about an object moving extremely fast, 45 kilometers per second, that exploded about 100 miles off the coast of Papua New Guinea in the Pacific Ocean. And we calculated that, in fact, this object was not bound to the sun. In other words, it came from outside the solar system. And that was the very first object that humans spotted from outside the solar system in 2014. And we submitted a paper for publication about it, saying, here is the first interstellar meteor. And the paper was rejected. The reviewers said, we don't believe the US government. Of course, I had no doubt that the US government measures things properly, because they need to know whether a ballistic missile is headed towards Boston or New York City. And so, but it took a few years, and I reached out beyond the national security fence. And in March 2022, there was a letter sent to NASA from the US Space Command under the Department of Defense, confirming at the 99.999% confidence that indeed this object, this meteor, came from outside the solar system. At which point our paper was accepted for publication. The government also released the data on the fireball, the light curve that came out from this explosion. It released about a few percent of the Hiroshima bomb energy. And we could calculate with my student that, in fact, the meteor was of very unusual material strength. It was tougher than iron. It was tougher than all other meteors in the catalog, 272 of them. So it was the toughest object ever discovered to collide with Earth. And even if you think about iron meteorites, they make up only 5% of all the space rocks. So why would the first interstellar object appear to be so tough? It may mean that it comes from a completely different origin, that is not a planetary system like the solar system, but something else. It could be natural. It could, for example, originate from an exploding star, or it could be a spacecraft, an artificial object. And the only way to find out is to figure out the composition of the object. So we are planning, I announced an expedition that will go and scoop the ocean floor, look for the fragments of this meteor at the location where it exploded. And we calculated the size of the fragments. There are many of them that are of order a millimeter in size. And so we are planning that expedition. I received full funding for it at $1.5 million. And we hope to do it before June 2023,
Wow.
and then report back what we find. I mean, if we find a composition that is consistent with a natural object, so be it, and it would be really interesting to figure out where it came from. But it may also appear to be made of an artificial alloy, such as stainless steel, for example, that would indicate an artificial origin. And I told already the curator of the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, Paula Antonelli, that if we find a gadget, I will bring it for display because it would represent modernity for us, the Museum of Modern Art, and even though it represents ancient history for the senders.
I love that. I love everything you said in that. And yeah, my question was going to be how can you tell? And this applies to Oumuamua as well. How can you tell if something is natural? Because with the vast number of planets that are out there and solar systems and galaxies and all the things, something that we consider natural, say, for example, carbon-based life forms or something with the atoms and molecules that we know to be, standard, like hydrogen, helium, like all those elements. And so is it possible that other planets have elements that are natural to them that maybe we consider to be artificial, say, but for them, maybe that tough piece of stainless steel like thing could be natural. So how would you know? And I think that really fascinates me, because right now it's all hypothesis. And I love that, you're so enthusiastic about finding this out. But even if you did have a hypothesis that maybe it came from some, I was just going to say, like, man-made or extraterrestrial made thing, do you have methods that could verify whether or not it's natural to an element you've seen in the galaxy, or would you just be hypothesizing again?
No, so the way to tell is by looking at the composition, the abundances of elements. So just imagine the difference between a rock and a spacecraft. Okay, so suppose I take both of them and grind them to dust. I still would be able to tell that one object was a rock where the other was not, because there are certain abundances of elements needed to make a spacecraft that is quite different from natural objects. Okay, right. And so that's the hope that we will be able to distinguish. And you're right that in principle we might be in the gray area where it would not be obvious whether it's natural or artificial. But that's in the case where you are just looking at the element abundances. If you have a piece that is big enough so that you can examine the structure of it, then you can definitely tell. And moreover, if the object is intact, didn't collide with the Earth, or if some piece of the object remains intact, then you can definitely identify where it came from. So just imagine, for example, an object that didn't burn up in the atmosphere, that you monitor, you take a close-up photograph and you see screws and bolts and even a label saying made on exoplanet Y. Obviously, it would not be a rock. So there are ways to clearly differentiate. And it's, again, as I say, all you need is a very high resolution image. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. In my case, a picture is worth 66,000 words, the number of words in my book. I would much rather show a photo album of the object of Oumuamua that we can speak about, that my book was related to, Extraterrestrial, than write the book. It's much easier. I wouldn't have to put effort in assembling words to a book. I think when you have very clear evidence, you don't need to say much.
Yeah, a picture definitely does speak. In your case, 66,000 words. And that's quite an impressive book. I definitely do want to get to Oumuamua. I feel like that's a big point of discussion for today, but I feel like I want to get something else kind of addressed first. And so, if anyone who's watching this is remotely a UFO enthusiast or some form of a scientist who's looked at anything to do with this topic, I mean, we've all come across Roswell, we've come across Area 51, we've come across, a lot of stories about people who have claimed to have contact. There's a lot out there, and I really wanted to know your opinion on particularly those things that I mentioned, because it seems that there are people out there who have had, direct contact with these beings. And so why is it that they'd be coming to some people and not just openly sort of waving their flag and saying, hey, we're here?
Right. So my take is that humans are not scientific detectors, because humans are subject to hallucinations, to wishful thinking. They can report things that didn't really happen, and the evidence for that is that human testimony is taken seriously in the courtroom, in the legal system. And how many cases are we aware of people that were put in jail, and then later on it was found that they were innocent, that even though there were other people testifying that they did a crime, that they weren't really responsible for it. And DNA testing shows that they had nothing to do with it, or some other evidence comes along. So my point is, there is a good reason why science is not based on human testimonies. It's based on instruments, because instruments do not have a personality. They just record whatever, and they can reproduce the result again and again if you put them under the same circumstances. And so you cannot find a scientific paper, a physics paper, in which the authors say, these people told me that, and based on their testimony, I conclude this and that. That is never happening. You never see that. It's all based on instrumentation, for a good reason, because over the years, physicists or scientists realize that you can't really trust humans. So as a result, if we want to bring this subject to the mainstream of science and actually trust the conclusions that we draw out of the evidence, we cannot rely on people. Now, of course, if you imagine nobody looking at the sky except for military personnel, and because they have their job, their day job to monitor the sky for national security purposes, they would be the first to notice unusual objects, obviously. Mm-hmm. So I'm not at all surprised that it's them that are reporting about unidentified aerial phenomena, and not scientists like astronomers. Astronomers are focused on very distant sources. If something flies overhead, they just ignore it. So it will not be scientists who would report about unusual objects if they exist. It would be the military that monitors the sky all the time, and the intelligence agencies. And guess what? Last year, the Director of National Intelligence in the US submitted a report to the US Congress admitting that there are many objects they don't fully understand. And as a result, there was a new office established in government to study the data and perhaps do some research to figure out the nature of these objects. So the government is a very conservative organization, but it's not a scientific organization. It's geared towards protecting the nation, the safety of military personnel. If these objects came from another civilization, that's not a national item. It's not, it has to do with the universe. It has to do with knowledge that should be shared by all humans. It has to be studied by scientists. And that's why I think that it's very intriguing that the government is talking about these things, and but it's not sufficient for us to rely on, because the government has the most exciting data is classified, because it was obtained by classified sensors. So it's intriguing enough to motivate a scientist like me to collect scientific data. And that's why I established the Galileo project in July 2021. And by now, we assembled a suite of instruments that is monitoring the sky 24/7 in the infrared, in the radio, in the optical, in the audio. And then we will analyze the data with artificial intelligence algorithms, try to figure out what kind of objects we see. And there are two types that will obviously be there, natural objects like bugs or insects or birds, and obviously also human-made objects like drones, satellites, airplanes, rockets. And the question is whether there is anything else. And we will make our data public, open, and our analysis transparent. And I think that's the way to make progress on this question. Now, of course, a lot of people report about their personal experience and their personal encounters. If it comes from military sources, they basically use the instrumentation they have to the best of their ability, but they are not scientists, and it's intriguing enough to motivate the Galileo project. But we cannot really rely on it because the most convincing data is probably classified. I haven't seen it. I haven't seen convincing data at the moment.
Yeah, and I did read on your website that part of your project is that you're not accessing any classified data, probably, for good reason, because it's hidden by the military. And so you've decided to essentially take it into your own hands to figure it out for yourself, surveillance the sky and use whatever instruments it takes. Yeah, so I guess, there's a lot of open questions in this space still, because there are people out there that are saying, well, I've had contact. There are people out there claiming to be abducted. There are people out there that are even deeper down the conspiracy theory hole of things like how much information has the government actually hidden for us, things like Project Blue Book. There's a lot out there. I mean, if you really go looking for it, you can find a lot of stuff. I guess what I'm interested in particularly is, now I want to talk about Oumuamua because it was quite controversial. There are people out there that are stating that it was just a piece of ice, maybe from Pluto, or, that there's a few different theories out there. And you've come in and basically said, well, hang on, I think this is maybe not natural. So I would love to know what instigated that for you, that made you think, hang on a second, this particular football field sized object requires more investigation.
Right. So I approached it just like all other astronomers to start with. In fact, I wrote a paper a decade earlier forecasting how many rocks from other stars should we see coming from interstellar space based on what we know in the solar system. And we predicted that this telescope in Hawaii, that was the first survey telescope of the sky that could have found such rocks, would not find anything. And then it reported by chance about the first object in October 19th, 2017, given the name Oumuamua, which means a scout in the Hawaiian language, roughly the size of a football field, simply because it came close to Earth. And this survey was intended to look for near-Earth objects. Now, that was a surprise to me because it implied that there are many more interstellar objects than we expect based on what we know about the solar system, which still holds. It was really unusual that we found it. But then I still thought maybe it's a rock. And as time went on, more and more peculiar properties of this object showed up. For example, as it was tumbling every 8 hours, the amount of sunlight reflected from it changed by a factor of 10. And that meant that it has a very extreme shape. The analysis of the reflected light over time implied that it has a pancake-like shape, a flat geometry, which is very unusual for a rock. And then there was no cometary tail. It didn't look like a comet. Usually, when a rock is covered with ice, the ice evaporates when it comes close to the sun, and you get a nice cometary tail around it. There was nothing like it. And in fact, the Spitzer Space Telescope looked very deeply and couldn't find any traces of dust or carbon-based molecules that evaporated from the object. So it was definitely not a comet. But then it showed an excess push away from the sun. And the question is, what generated that push? And if there is no rocket effect from a cometary evaporation, what could it be? And so the only thing I could think of was the reflection of sunlight is pushing it. And for that, the object had to be very thin, sort of like a sail or an outer layer of an object that is very thin. And then nature doesn't make such things that are flat and thin. So I suggested it might be artificial. That was my motivation. And then 3 years later, the same telescope in Hawaii discovered another object with the same qualities. It was pushed away from the sun by reflecting sunlight, and it had no cometary tail. It was discovered in September 2020 and was given the name 2020 SO. At first, the astronomers didn't know what to make of it, but then within a few weeks, they realized 2020 SO is actually a rocket booster. If we go back in time, it was launched from Earth in 1966 by NASA, and it followed the exact trajectory that we expect from that launch. Here is an example of an artificial object, and we know that it was thin. The walls were thin because we made them, and that's why it was reflecting sunlight, and the walls did not evaporate because they were made of stainless steel, and the sunlight was sufficiently strong to push the object simply because it was hollow. And since we know that it's artificial because we produced it, the question is, who produced Oumuamua?
Right. Wow. And that is a huge revelation in and of itself. And I mean, I'm guessing at this point, it's been ruled out that it was another man-made object, right? Like, I'm sure people have looked into it.
Oh, yeah, no, it cannot be because in different, okay, so this 2020 SO was still moving not too far from the Earth. It was sort of moving around the orbit of the Earth around the sun, and because it was launched at a relatively low speed relative to the Earth, so it wasn't escaping from the solar system. However, Oumuamua reached us with a speed that is larger than the escape speed from the solar system, and it was faster than any rocket that we have launched in our history. So we could not have been responsible for, and also Oumuamua came at an angle from a completely distant location in a different direction than we would have launched it. So there is no way that it came from a human-made technology. And moreover, it came from outside the solar system because it was moving too fast to be bound to the sun. So the origin of it is unclear. By the way, another peculiar property of Oumuamua was that there is the so-called local standard of rest, which is the frame of reference that you get to when you average over the motions of all the stars in the vicinity of the sun. It's sort of the frame of the galaxy locally. And the sun is moving relative to this frame, just like any other star in the vicinity of the sun. And Oumuamua was at rest in that frame. Only 1 in 500 stars is so much at rest relative to that frame as Oumuamua was. So the way to think of it is that Oumuamua was like a buoy sitting at rest on the surface of the ocean, and the sun, the solar system, like a giant ship, bumped into it. So obviously it was not bound to the sun, it was completely independent, and the sun came close to it along its path and gave it a kick.
Wow. And this object did then just disappear about as quickly as it entered, right?
So it just followed the laws of dynamics, and it moved on in a different direction, and the sun gave it.
Unusual about that, or was it just like a standard motion when it was leaving?
Most of the motion was explained by the gravity of the sun, but a fraction of a percent of the force acting on it was unexplained, and that was the excess push that I was talking about that I explained as a result of the reflection of sunlight. So it was a small fraction of the force. But if it had to, for example, provide this excess force out of evaporation from the rocket effect, just like comets do, then the object had to lose about a tenth of its mass, 10% of its mass had to evaporate, and we would have seen it very clearly if it was the rocket effect pushing it. It was a small correction to the trajectory, but it made it different than a trajectory shaped solely by the sun's gravity. Mm-hmm. And the way to think of it, think about the sun as being a racket that gives a kick to a ping pong ball through its gravity. So the object just came close to the sun, and then the sun basically deflected its trajectory by its gravity.
Okay, so I wanna hold that thought. So far, potentially artificial object, natural movements. And again, there's a lot of open questions in this. There's a lot of things that we can sort of go into. I know that you are writing a book. You've got a new book coming up, and I would love to hear a little bit about some of the topics that you'll be addressing in this new book.
Right. So the new book is called The Interstellar, and it will focus about the impact on humanity from finding evidence for technological gadgets from other civilizations. Now, I should say that quantum mechanics could be very important in the context of those gadgets, just for the same reason that it is crucial for the cell phones, the computers that we use. I mean, the internet, it's all based on the principles of quantum mechanics that were discovered over the past century. And our science is only a century old, if you think about it. And if we find relics from other civilizations, they are much more likely to represent technologies that are in our future, because 100 years is only one part in 100 million of the age of most stars. So, there are two possibilities. You can imagine other civilizations being more primitive than we are, the way we were for the past few million years before the last century. But to find those civilizations, you have to board a spaceship, fly to their planet, and start searching through the bushes and the trees to find them. That's a lot of work. It's also a lot of time to take that journey. I don't think we will ever do it. A simpler approach is to find evidence for the civilizations that are far more advanced than we are, because they may have sent probes that are equipped with artificial intelligence. I call them AI astronauts. So they are not biological creatures, and they could be small. And my guess is that small is better for interstellar travel. You wouldn't, because it's more difficult for predators to destroy small things. And you can cover a larger volume of space. You can send a lot of small things to many places. So it's quite possible that there are lots of small probes that we haven't noticed that are moving nearby. And if we will encounter anything, it will be a small probe that was sent to the habitable region of the solar system, not with the intention of finding us, because we were not around more than a few million years ago when these probes started their journey. And also, we became interested only recently. So I don't think they had us in mind. It's just that they had some agenda. And it's not clear what this agenda was. I mean, you can think of them as pursuing some guiding principles of whoever sent them. And I think, if we are right now thinking about artificial intelligence driving cars and doing tasks that humans do here on Earth, at some point we will start sending them as astronauts to space, and other civilizations could have done that already. And in my view, that will be our first encounter with such gadgets. And so in my book, I talk about the implications of finding that in terms of how it will inspire us, how it would educate us to be more intelligent, because, it's possible that nobody cares so much about us. That's why we haven't heard from anyone, just because we are behaving in ways that are destructive. We allocate most of our resources to fighting each other, and we have most of our agenda is restricted to the two-dimensional surface of this rock that we live on, the Earth. And if you just look at the images that came from the Orion spacecraft that went behind the moon recently, there is no way you can tell the border between Ukraine and Russia from a large distance, from distance of the moon. It's not visible. However, most of the newspapers during the time that the photos were taken were discussing that border. And so it means that we are preoccupied with things that are completely irrelevant when you look at the big picture. And my hope is that if we find evidence for a smarter kid on our block, it would inspire us to realize that there is something much smarter than all of us out there, and that first of all, we better treat each other as equal members of the human species and not try to feel superior relative to each other, because it makes little sense. And, we wasted a lot of human history in groups of people trying to feel superior relative to other people and causing atrocities. And in the big scheme of things, it's pathetic, because the universe, there is this third dimension going to space, and out there is much more real estate than here on Earth. And I think it teaches us modesty. And so one aspect of our arrogance is the fact that we are not paying attention to interstellar space. Another aspect of our arrogance is that we are saying we are the only ones in the universe, the smartest that ever existed, and it's an extraordinary claim to even consider other civilizations out there. That's the way the scientific community addresses this. They say extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and they regard it as an extraordinary claim. And while at the same time, for example, we don't know what the dark matter is, and most of the matter in the universe, we don't know what it is. And so there are all kinds of ideas, like, for example, maybe it's the lightest particle that satisfies a symmetry called supersymmetry. So that was a very popular idea for several decades, and the Large Hadron Collider, at the investment of $10 billion, did not find the lightest supersymmetric particle. We don't know if it exists. Nobody said that the lightest supersymmetric particle, being the dark matter, is an extraordinary claim, and therefore, since it has no extraordinary evidence, we will not fund the search. No, they said, that's an interesting claim. Let's look for it. Let's put $10 billion into the Large Hadron Collider. And then we didn't find anything. And I'm saying if we invest only 1% of that amount of $10 billion, just $100 million, we can get to the bottom of a question of what are these unidentified objects that the government is talking about. That's what the Galileo project is trying to do. We could find more interstellar objects and try to take a close-up photograph of them. And we could search for interstellar meteors and identify what they're made of and see if any of them is artificial. That's what the Galileo project is trying to do. And my point is that somehow the academic community lost its attention to what the public cares about. Very often funding agencies that are populated by mainstream scientists, they say, we don't want to take any risk because we will waste taxpayers' money if we were to take risks. But guess what? If you were to ask the taxpayers, they would tell you this is a question they care much more about than the nature of dark matter. And somehow the academic community is blocking further research in this direction. And so I find that inappropriate. I think that we should reflect the public's interest. And the evidence for that is that when I published my book, Extraterrestrial, there were a lot of donations given to my research that allowed me to establish the Galileo project. So clearly the public cares about it. And I think that this is a correction that needs to be made in the mainstream of science to address this frontier. And so I'm talking about all of these aspects in the new book, Interstellar, that will come out in August 2023.
I can't wait to read it. I'm still getting through your first one at the moment, and it's mind-blowing. I think, some of the concepts that you've put in there, definitely the stuff about Oumuamua and so many other things. And I think you've definitely hit the nail on the head, even from a more, philosophical perspective, that it is going to come down to peace as a human race. I think there is a place for humans to, like you said, drop the arrogance and to just start acknowledging that maybe it's not just us. And the implications of that are huge. I feel like that's a whole conversation in and of itself, that if we suddenly tomorrow realize that we're not alone in the universe, would humans band together and unify, or would they just find another common enemy? It's like at the moment, it's like country versus country or state versus state. Would it then be Earth versus aliens, or would we finally just, get some peace and then harmony within us, and maybe they teach us a better way to live. Maybe they've got governance systems that are more functional. Maybe they've worked out some of the kinks. I personally don't believe humanity is very evolved at all for the same reasons that you said. I think we have a long way to go. I think we're barely in our I'd say, we're like in our teenage phase of humancy, if you want to call it that. And I think we have a lot to learn when it comes to how to just be a human race together, let alone, discover other planets. So yeah, definitely loved a lot of the insights that you gave in the book. I know we are going to wrap this up really shortly. There's one other burning question on my mind that I have before we part with some final words, and that's, so recently, Biden did actually sign a document as part of the National Defense Bill for the new year. So Christmas Eve 2022, that basically gives amnesty to any whistleblowers who come forward and speak about UAPs. Now, this is huge. I'm expecting military personnel, past, present, to be coming out of the woodworks like there's no tomorrow, sharing their experiences now without fear of retribution. What do you think is going to happen now that that has just been passed?
Well, since these people did not come out earlier, I just don't know what to expect, because it's obvious that a lot of people kept it to themselves because they were worried about the repercussions, either for their job or reputation. And if now a lot of them will come out, we will hear a lot of stories. And there is also an issue of classified data and whether that would restrict some of them from coming out because they signed the NDAs, so they can't really speak openly about it. But it will definitely be a good step in the right direction. I once spoke with a government employee who told me that if they ever find conclusive evidence for an extraterrestrial device, that they will report it first to the US president. And I said that makes very little sense to me, because it's just like imagining that 100 years ago, Cecilia Payne-Kopashkin, who was the first astronomer to get a PhD at Harvard University, she discovered that the sun is made mostly of hydrogen. And by extrapolation, it's true of the entire universe. The most abundant element of ordinary matter is hydrogen. And imagine Cecilia being told, you have to tell that first to the US president. That makes very little sense, because it's a fact about the universe. It should be knowledge that is being shared by all humans. And right. That's the way science is done. Science is all about sharing knowledge, and it's an infinite sum game. It's not as if one person gains knowledge, another person loses it. Actually, everyone gains knowledge. And so we need to bring this subject, if it appears not to be related to adversaries, to espionage, to national security concerns, this subject needs to be brought into the scientific mainstream so that we can collect as much evidence as possible. We can understand what we are talking about. And then we will face another issue. There are two types of objects you can imagine. One is space trash, objects that are not functional, that happen to collide with Earth, for example. And another type is functional devices. And having functional devices near Earth is just like having a visitor in your backyard. You need to respond. You need to decide what to do about it immediately. And we don't have an organization that represents humanity. And it would be a huge policy issue as to what to do and how to interpret what this device is seeking, and how to translate the intent of this device, and what kind of a response should we give to it. And that would be a major issue of debate and discussion. But first, we have to find it.
I think that area, I've just coined it myself as intergalactic relations, is something that is of very, personal, high interest to me. And as for the objects, there have been a small handful of information that has now been declassified. For example, from the Pentagon, I believe in 2020, there were some videos released that were from military defense personnel. There was an object that they said was transmedium. And at that particular point in time, and I find this really fascinating, at that particular point in time, everyone who was talking about it said that there was no such a vehicle that existed on this planet. Like, it was not a possible technology. However, I do believe reading something recently that China has now created something that's transmedium. So it's interesting to see that, this was discovered and now potentially it's coming out that this technology exists. Again, there's a lot of open questions. Did China already have the technology and didn't tell anyone? And then we thought it was a UFO, or did it exist and somehow that intel got to the Chinese and they were able to maybe like reverse engineer? I don't know. There's a lot of open questions in that. I mean, do you have
that's why we need to bring this subject to the realm of science, where there will be open data. Nobody will try to manipulate anyone. It will not be in the hands of military entities. And the one thing I really hope for is, just like in the film Arrival, if we encounter some object that we have to interact with, that the interpreter would be a woman. That's what I really want, because there is a much better, women have much better communication skills. They have much better intelligence in dealing with foreign entities. And so that is my only wish on that subject.
Well, I would happily volunteer myself for the role. I'll be front and center to greet these beings when they come and say, hi, how's it going? On that note, as we wrap up today, I think it's been very insightful, a lot of different topics covered, and really grateful for your time. If you were to imagine just for a moment that an alien from another planet somehow received or tapped into the transmission of what we just spoke about, what would you say to them as a parting message from us?
Well, first of all, I don't think they regard us as very threatening or significant. Just the way a biker driving down the sidewalk doesn't really care much about the ants in the cracks of the pavement, So I think it's very likely that if someone is visiting us, that we are very primitive in the eyes of whatever that system is, if it has artificial intelligence or even living organisms. And so what I would like to say is have patience with us, try to guide us in the right direction, try to educate us. From our perspective, I think it's a great benefit, because we can get a leap into our future. By looking over the shoulder of a smarter kid in our class, we can learn much more. Even though it may look as if we are cheating in the exam. We don't know the answers to fundamental questions like what happened before the Big Bang, how to unify quantum mechanics and gravity, what's inside a black hole, what is the dark matter. We don't know a lot, even though we pretend as if we learned a lot, but it's really an island of knowledge in an ocean of ignorance. And so I would really want to meet a superior intelligence just to learn from it. And to expand our horizons, and so that we will aspire for something better than what we did so far. And so to me, it's an uplifting notion that, we will be able to lift ourselves from this mud that we are born into on a daily basis on this earth for so many centuries. We've been doing the same thing over and over again. And if someone comes from far away and tells us, look, there is something else that you could do, that could actually change everything. So that's what I'm looking for.
I love that. Well, if anyone out there in the universe is listening in, you've definitely got 2 humans on this planet that want to meet you, and I'm sure many will. So thank you so much, Avi, for your time today. It's been extremely insightful. And I'm so personally, just want to give you a lot of gratitude, because I know how important this work is. And so just really appreciating your time and the energy that you've put into helping us as a human race to discover this and potentially advancing us and making us better human beings. So thank you so much for being with us today.
It was a pleasure speaking with you. And if I see an opportunity for you to communicate with any other entity, I'll let you know.
I love that. Thank you. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to First Contact. I'm your host Ish Patel, and I'm so excited to have this conversation about open contact with extraterrestrial beings. Come join me in the Facebook community where you can continue the discussion, or keep listening for another episode of First Contact.